Just like in real estate, it's all about location, location, location. Whether it's a prehistoric beach or voting patterns in presidential elections, or both at the same time. Welcome to American Esoterica. If history class gives you the customer service line, this is the repeatedly pressing zero in hopes of reaching an actual person. The essential stuff in between. The personalities, events, and other ephemera that shape our history and culture. I'm Brian Powers. So just what do a prehistoric beach and presidential election voting patterns have in common? Well, in a slew of southern states, everything. In every presidential election since 1964, there's a visible pattern of vote tallies by county in a specific area. A ribbon of votes that runs from Mississippi through Alabama and Georgia before cutting across the heart of South Carolina. For the sake of not getting too political, let's just say that it's a blue ribbon through a sea of red. If you look election by election starting in 1968, you can see it form. A little faintly at first, but then gaining even more prominence over time. In the last several presidential elections, it's nearly a solid line, becoming more prominent instead of less. Even as the times in the nation changed, this pattern has remained relatively stable. So just how did it get this way? The answer lies a bit further back. Over 100 million years back. During the Cretaceous period, which spanned the era of time from roughly 139-ish million years ago to around 65 million years ago, a large sea covered much of the United States. The area just east of the Rocky Mountains was entirely covered by the Western Interior Seaway, an unbroken stretch of water that ran from the northern coast of Alaska down through Latin America. On the east side of the giant sea, the landmass known as Appalachia ended at a coastline that ran in a large and gentle curve around the states we know as Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia, and South Carolina, with some Arkansas and North Carolina thrown in at the ends as well. Florida, Louisiana, and Texas, entirely underwater. The shallow waters near this coastline proved to be the perfect spot for the abundant growth of a type of plankton that grew itself carbonate shells. As these plankton lived, reproduced, and died, they left behind a mass of fossilized sediment in the form of chalk, which formed a geological arch. When the waters of the sea slowly receded, these large masses of chalk remained in place, but exposure to the elements slowly dissolved the chalk until only a nutrient-rich sediment deposit of clay and sand remained. As a result, the soil made up of this rich material took on a darker hue, so the areas where this soil existed became known as the Black Belt for the soil color. Hold on to that fact. It's important to remember where the name came from. The band of rich soil was incredibly distinctive. It became prized by growers for its richness, and land just 10 miles on either side of the Black Belt wasn't nearly as good. It was far more productive soil than any other, particularly when growing the South's most dependable cash crop, cotton. Because of the conditions of the soil, more and more plantations sprang up along the Black Belt. And cotton, a difficult and labor-intensive crop, therefore required more bodies. Until 1865-ish, that labor was provided by the enslaved. After the Civil War, however, many of these formerly enslaved folks were already accustomed to the area and had deep ties and families now going back generations. They made for themselves a home in a newly recentered nation, conceived in liberty and recently rededicated to the proposition that all were created equal. In the Black Belt counties in particular, African Americans make up at least 50% and in some cases as much as 85% of the population. And though certainly not monolithic, the descendants of those formerly enslaved have largely been voting reliably for one party over another in presidential elections since 1964, carving out a visible blue streak across 4 reliably red states. That's how the shape of a prehistoric inland sea affects the voting patterns in presidential elections over 100 million years later. But we're not done yet. We've been dancing around it, but let's just tackle it head on. Why did this pattern just start to emerge after 1964? Because of Jim Crow. Until the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965, Southern states did everything in their power to restrict the rights of black voters. This is evident in the voting patterns of the 1964 election, unless you believe that all the citizens of the Black Belt counties in Alabama voted for Barry Goldwater. It's also unfathomable that these counties voted at over 90% rates for Strom Thurmond's 1948 Dixiecrats states' rights ticket to preserve segregation. The pattern emerges in 1968 because after 1965, the states could no longer restrict the African American vote as effectively, which resulted in a very new wave crashing against a very old beach. This has been American Esoterica. All sounds were made by me, Brian Powers. Did I get it wrong? Did I get it right? Just want to tell me how much geology rocks? Drop me a note. The address is yale@americanesoterica.com. More information on this show and its episodes can be found at americanesoterica.com. Thank you for listening, and God bless America.